Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tourism and Hotel Investment Networking Conference 2017. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here to give us an overview of the international hotel valuations, please welcome on stage Mr. Stephen Rushmore Jr.
It's a real pleasure and honor to be speaking with you here this morning. I'm going to talk about hotel valuation trends on a global level. What happens in the United States is really a leading indicator for many other markets around the world. What is going on in the US and many markets is about a 12 month to about a 2-year leading indicator of what's happening elsewhere. And like it or not, people in the United States are starting to realize that we are at the peak of the hotel cycle. And I would say that many other markets around the world are pretty close to peak or at peak as well. And when your market is at close to peak, you need to be prepared to hold on to your asset for about 8 years before you're going to get any sort of meaningful value appreciation. And so you need to be, as a hotel owner or investor, you need to be comfortable with the cash flow that an asset is currently producing. The other thing that I get asked a lot is, where are the opportunities to invest? What markets should I be investing in hotels? And now more than ever, there's not really a good answer for that. The opportunities don't exist in a specific market. Going forward, it's going to be a lot more niche. The opportunities are for specific types of hotels, specific niche hotels in specific markets and even submarkets. The last thing I'd like to talk about is Airbnb. And Airbnb is one of those topics that really touches the entire world when it comes to the hospitality industry. And there's been a lot of speaking with people, there's been concern and anxiety about Airbnb. I think overall Airbnb does have a role in the leisure segment. They're fulfilling a need that hasn't been met before in the traditional hospitality industry, but I don't see it as a direct threat to hotels. So that's a global overview. It's a pleasure speaking with you here this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, Laura Dutroux and the launch of the HVI.
So what is behind the 23 markets that are included in the HVI this year? The good news, it's a mixed picture, but the good news is we've been able to include 4 new markets, namely Maputo, Abidjan, Dakar, and Kampala. Which means first that tourism is opening up because we've been able to secure jobs in an increasing number of countries. And second, the data are getting increasingly available, which is actually really good news in Africa because its data are a challenge. The second good news is 14 markets out of 23 are actually growing. So my message today is governments have understood the importance of tourism. They're working on it. They're promoting tourism. The Brand Africa is being grounded. The African Union is funding Brand Africa. 54 countries are now going together at their own pace, but they are going together. New forms of tourism are growing as well. And I think, to be honest, that being here with I don't know how many eyes staring at me for the last 20 minutes. Key players being gathered in one room for a day and a half to talk about challenges and opportunities in Africa is actually a good news. It means that I think we've all come in here that we have opportunities in Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the inimitable Kura Chihota.
Thank you. What a fantastic introduction. Thank you very much. I almost half believed it myself. Yep, second year here down in Cape Town for this particular conference. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Tim has spoken about offshore money, be it IDC or be it German. How do we in Africa manage the gap between the cycle, the peaks and the troughs in the cycle? How do we fund that gap when the funds aren't flowing as readily?
Good question. I think what you have to do is try and manage down your numbers. And we do lots of refurbishments in lots of different markets. And as an industry, I think we need to be a lot more challenging of the building industry and the guys who put together these projects to make sure that when you genuinely build a hotel in that market, it's done on the most efficient basis. So just get that price as low as you can, challenge your professional teams, because they're on your payroll. Make sure they squeeze every single margin to get you the best, most efficient build. Because anything you save then, you can bank. And then later on, you have to build an operating model that can withstand that.
I'll just add to one of Johan's points earlier around construction costs, and in particular your question earlier about what would motivate us to invest north. I think if I had to try and invest in a country where I've got no network, no contacts, more than likely I'm going to end up with the most reputable construction firm at the highest possible price. Whereas in the local market, I know my way around, and I'm probably going to come in at a cheaper cost because of my knowledge of the local market and my contacts in the local market. So I think that alone could add 20-30% to your build cost, which ultimately impacts on the return one gets out of the business.
I'm going specialist into hotels in Africa. What sort of a return should I have benchmarked in my mind that would make sense on the continent? Really hard question.
Thank you. I think it comes down to two things. One is your appetite for risk, and by that the real length of time you want to own the asset. Because if you own the asset for a longer time, you can take a lower return, and it makes sense, and it's a good transaction. Stephen mentioned earlier the average holding period in the States is 6 or 7 years. In Africa, in some of these markets, because of the turbulence and so on, owners really need to take a longer term approach. And if you look at that, then the return you get won't be very different to the return you get in other asset classes, but you hold it for a longer period. That's the quick.
Conducting the interview will be Mr. Rishabh Tapat of HVS, and might I also welcome to stage from FNB, Mr. Steve Kirst.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with Steve for two reasons. A, he's a banker who's been working with various banks for about 20 years, a good part of 2 decades. The second is that Steve is a specialist in the hospitality and mixed-use development. So, I mean, we're coming from a standpoint, a banker's view, who understands the hotel industry. And can you list in order of rank what are the top 4 or 5 points that you look at when you see a proposal?
But if they haven't done a hotel development or owned a hotel before, then it's no.
If they have hotel experience but don't own a hotel?
If it's small, maybe yes.
Okay.
Because there's various other assets that they've got that can rely on. But if we start talking 200-300 million rand, 150 million rand facilities on hotels, if there's no experience, then we don't believe it's appropriate. And there's so many different risks, especially with the development.
So number one is experience. Second or third, fourth?
I think a brand, we're not necessarily looking for a brand that is also the owner. We're not fixed on that at all. And to have a management agreement or, with a good brand is very important. But knowing the niche of the hotel product, who you're aiming for, and having a good set of skills, together with perhaps a management agreement where there's a branding agreement. We've been quite impressed with how passionate owners with experience have gone about doing individual hotels quite successfully and actually carried them through the downtimes by being quite innovative in terms of their marketing and going aggressively over very specific products, which is sometimes more difficult to do if it's a big hotel brand and it's got one standardized set of marketing, which seems to surf on top of the wave of ups or downs and not seek out specific opportunities. So just to make that point that we're open to both of those.
Please join me in welcoming onto stage the STR's Area Director for the Middle East and Africa. Please put your hands together for Mr. Philip Waller.
The first question I'd like to ask is purely selfish. We've just launched the HVI, and this year we've had 4 new markets enter, but we've lost 2 markets because the data wasn't readily available this year, unfortunately. but there are another 10, 15 markets that we'd love to include. What can we do about that? Why is the data not there for those markets?
It's not just a question of knocking on doors and these hotels saying, there you go. We have to spend a huge amount of time with these hotels to show them the benefits of why data is so important. It depends on the markets, of course.
And what are the big challenges that stops hotels giving you that data in the first place?
Well, I think it's probably expertise and knowing what to do with the data. And I think you made a comment about when hotels perform badly. I was in a resort market not so long ago, which used to be, a huge destination. And I was talking to some of the hoteliers. We had a whiskey. At that point, they were saying everything was wonderful. We had a whiskey tasting session in the evening, and then they all sort of declared that when they shared data locally, they all exaggerated it massively because they didn't want the embarrassment of saying, well, we're running at 18% occupancy. And what I'm trying to do with them is kind of like, it's not about individual data. Nobody sees it. If you're all running at 18%, then we should see the data. The destination has to start thinking about, well, what can we do with it? But if everyone's saying, well, we're running at 50%, then the destination doesn't necessarily realise it's such a big problem. So it's a combination of reasons. Every single destination is different, but the more data that we get, the more benefit it is to everybody.
Leading educators from some of the finest educational institutions on the planet.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for staying behind for this important session on people. I think all of us know, forget new hotels that will be opening, but all of us in this room have learnt over the years. We've been experienced either formal education, informal development from mentors in the companies that we've worked for. But I think what we all have in common is the fact that we know it's the people in our business that makes our business.
65% of the primary school kids currently will have jobs in the future that are not invented yet. I think if we are not able to have a very close proximity to the industry, we may pass by what's actually happening in the classroom for catering talent for the industry. The problem what we currently have is that we are very siloed approach in every business school or in every school, that we always teach different areas, and I think in the future it's much more important to have cross functional areas, that we teach more personalized what's actually happening. And if we are designing curriculums, they need to be that flexible, because with the speed technology is advancing and the job roles are changing, we need to make sure that we adapt to them.
From a leadership point of view, we really want to install values-based leadership skills, because that is the context that we operate in. Africa is an emerging market. It's a very complex environment. It's very volatile, and it's highly unequal. How do leaders operate successfully in that environment?
Yeah, look, just one other point that Achim mentioned in terms of lifelong learning. I think the key challenge for educators is to decide, well, how do we future-proof education? It's a very difficult thing to make sure that the degree that you receive today is still going to carry its weight 10, 15 years into the future. One of the concepts that we're grappling with at the moment is moving into a new paradigm of design-based thinking, or design-based education. And traditionally, we don't really work with a model that is your typical lecturer stands up in front of a class, delivers content, the class leaves, and then has to assimilate it. We're a lot more interactive than that, and we put the students in the driver's seats in most instances. And this new design-based concept, you might have heard the term going around, is to say, well, let's do away with those traditional approaches. Let's pose a challenge to the students and make them create the outcome. And that in itself is a skill that will develop into the future, and then hopefully future-proof their minds and their qualifications, because now you've given them a platform by which they can grow, and when they face similar challenges later on in industry, they have that ability to think in the correct direction.
People often hear South Africans say the phrase, local is lekker, and that's something we truly believe in here. And that's not just because we're proudly South African. the concept of localist lekker can go global. Wherever your hotel is located, that's locality. And if you can tap into that, you will achieve lekker results.
I believe that we've got the best 3-star hotels in the world in this country, and not by some considerable distance as well. And the other pocket of excellence, potentially, is our game lodge business, the top end of the game lodge business. And if we have to compare that level of sophistication with, let's say, Nigeria, the gap is vast. But then again, so are the opportunities for regional and local hotel operators. So, what is the solution for us as regional players? Should we just lie back and believe our own propaganda that the table is big enough for all of us? I don't believe we can. And I believe that the answer lies in one word, and that is consolidation. In the greater scheme of things, we do have too many local players, which makes it difficult to operate these businesses. And in the last few years, we've seen some smaller management companies come and go. So that has definitely happened. And it's rather than make it easier for the local players, it's actually made it more difficult. So I agree with you in terms of consolidation. And I agree with you that there are quite a lot of players fighting over limited properties and having to compete with the larger players in some instances.
So, Guy, Neil is talking about consolidation in terms of properties, but I think in terms of what you're talking about consolidation in terms of markets, in terms of the number of operators coming together. And for whatever reason, maybe it's to actually club up against the larger chains, or it's really just to become more efficient and effective in the market.
So whether we call it groups or buying each other out or adding hotels, it really comes down to one thing, and it's scale.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the panel that I've been looking forward to the most.
If I can get right into it, if I can get 1 point from each of you on what is the biggest challenge or what is the biggest feedback that you would give to hotel owners, brands on developing hotels, because more often than not, I mean, we get it right for the most part of it, but there's some really glaring mistakes we make, and just the discussions that have happened so far, long construction time, cost overruns, and it benefits no one. So where is the problem?
It depends on the markets that you're in. In South Africa, working with an experienced operator, with an experienced team, you can fast track hotel developments. Working in Africa, it's a lot more different. The experience of the teams are not there. The experience of the owners is not there. It's really a lot more time has to be spent in the upfront stages of the development life cycle to get the project through the various baby steps. And you really need to get those efficiencies as high as possible to develop in Africa at a lower cost. So I think it depends where you are and the team that you're with and the operators that you're dealing with to determine what's the right method to go through.
And for us, the key on any development project is that upfront time that you take to properly research, develop, and sign off on your project before you physically go into the ground, whether it's a new build or refurbishment.
I think the one thing, it actually comes from the previous session, which was local is lekker. I think local is something that seems to be forgotten. And so local design becomes incredibly important. Use design, make it special, make it unique. And what frustrates me about so many projects, Santon and stuff like that, they look all European. Come on, there's such a fantastic opportunity to make things that belong locally. The third thing, local, is very important, actually, and a real game changer. Gone are the ideas that a hotel just sits in the street and it serves hotel guests only. Why does it do that? It can serve the locals that are around there just as well.